Some of that depends on the experience of the teacher. A teacher who knows where the curriculum is always going to rearrange their shelves, is going to rearrange the baskets or the trays or the things that they are displaying on the shelves. Regardless, to entirely set up a full classroom takes approximately 30 to 40 hours. Again, it depends on which level you're talking about. In early childhood, you will need the most amount of floor space, but the children are smaller. Practical life needs to be over a tiled area, so spills and water and all sorts of other things can be swept or mopped up. The language area will have more table space, while the math area and the sensorial area will have the most amount of floor space. Cultural and language require a minimum amount of space because most of it will be done on the table. When you're looking at the elementary environment, we are looking at the math area needing more floor space because the children will be doing their work on the rug. Language will be done at tables, by and large. And the cultural areas, science, geography, and history, will need about 1/3 of the floor space, combined with chairs and tables as well. Some of this depends on how many shelves you actually have. The math area will take the most number of shelves, and by and large, these materials are set out at the beginning of the year and stay all throughout the year. In early childhood, the beginning preliminary exercises are placed for practical life, but are rotated out after the first semester and children's skills improve. So what was there for the preliminary exercises is replaced with more intermediate and advanced practical life. Language, by and large, all of those materials will stay out as children work independently through the curriculum. The cultural area, you may rotate out science, different activities and experiences and experiments that the children can do for the early childhood. The geography is generally a standalone map stand and some card material. For the elementary classroom, if you follow where you do a part of speech a month for grammar, so September is nouns, October is articles, November is adjectives, December is verbs, etc., you may rotate out just those parts of speech. Similarly, for geometry, when the second and third levels are studying a specific figure or sets of figures, you only need to put out the triangle, for example. You do not need to have all of the nomenclature. In history, when you're working with the fundamental needs of people, you may put out the physical needs and later address the spiritual needs. So many of these materials, specifically if it has nomenclature, may be rotated through. Math in elementary will remain out all year and will not be rotated. In the early childhood, since each individual activity is pulled off of the shelf, you need to be mindful of the type of basket or tray or container that not only houses the material but fits on the shelf. You need to be creative. And as much as possible, be consistent in your containers. So if you have a particular area in science, you might want to use blue trays. If you have a particular area in practical life that is fine motor control, you may want to use yellow trays. You can color code according to chunks of material on the shelves. The elementary classroom, these students can handle more stackable type activities, and as a matter of fact, you really don't want to use baskets and trays. You want to use sorters, you want to use clear envelopes that allow the children to see the materials but are placed in a file sorter so that the multiple materials are accessible and take up less shelf space. In a Montessori classroom for the early childhood, you have the practical life, sensorial, math, language, and cultural areas. In the elementary classroom, we have the math and language areas, as well as the science, history, and geography areas. Since the math materials stay out all year, it requires the most number of shelves. Generally, it requires approximately 5 shelves to contain the materials for each age group. Generally, early childhood, the height of the shelves is not going to be any taller than 35 or 36 inches. Elementary, the children may use taller shelves, and they tend to be 4 foot long instead of 3 foot long. In early childhood, language also takes quite a few number of shelves, at least 5, in order to have the full curriculum, which includes the preliminary language materials for phonemic awareness, beginning reading for CVC words, blends, and phonograms, and extending into writing and grammar. In the early childhood classroom, these are the fewest number of shelves are for the cultural area. Practical life, generally, you can contain, since you're rotating, your practical life materials on 4 shelves, as well as the sensorial area, using 4 shelves. In the elementary area, the number of shelves, again, the math area requires the most number, generally 5. Your language, generally 4 shelves. Cultural, science, geography, and history. Of those 3 areas, science will require the most number of shelves, at minimum 3, preferably 4 for science. Geography and history are often blended together, and you can use approximately 3 shelves for those. The geometry area generally will require 2 to 3 shelves, depending on how much of the nomenclature you choose to put out. In order to save shelf space, we often rotate materials out as children lose interest or they have passed that particular section of the curriculum. In early childhood, rotation generally occurs in the practical life area, where you start with preliminary exercises and move to the intermediate and the advanced practical life. Simple rotation in the practical life area within each one of those preliminary, intermediate, or advanced activities can be as simple as changing the watercolor, changing the media that is being poured, or things like that. In the elementary area, the rotation model looks like. What series of nomenclature are you studying? For example, if it's botany and you were doing a section on leaves, whether it is first level, second level, or third level, just the leaf parts would be out with those extensions. Naturally, in order for this rotation model to take place, you need to have storage space to place the extra curriculum that is not on the shelf. So you have a trade-off. Do you have more closet space or do you have more shelf space? That all depends on what your classroom is set up.